Were you weirded out by his accent? Because it did take me...
I thought he actually did a really good job with it.
He does an excellent accent, but it is so different from his normal that it threw me for a bit.
It threw me was when he first started it, and I was like, what on earth?
Well, yeah. Because...
I did think it was funny, because anytime he cursed, I just heard Alfie.
No, it's not the same.
It sounded really similar.
No, Alfie had a different tone of voice, not just a different accent. Like, he spoke differently. I think it's, well, here's the thing you might not know. Did you at all wonder that it sounded just slightly Indian?
I don't know that I caught that specifically.
Well, because the reason, and this is fascinating, is that of all things, the Welsh accent, which I think is very clearly what he was going for, is actually very closely related to the Indian accent.
Why is that?
Well, it's totally random. I mean, it's not really. It makes sense when you know the history, but it does seem totally random because the first British troops in colonial India were Welsh. So the Welsh taught the Indians how to speak English, and thus, technically, Indians have Welsh accents, not the other way around. And it's not universal because, of course, not all Welsh accents are the same, but I just thought it was fascinating that, like, one of the odd tips you can use is if you're hearing a British accent you can't place, if it sounds at all slightly Indian, it's Welsh. And I was just like, that's just such a bizarre bit of interesting history. But, yeah. Well, didn't you say you had another one? Or is it time for one of mine? What is that's not even a villain! You don't even know that he's an enemy! He's not even armed!
He looks villainy.
I just want to shank an orc in the kidneys.
I'm popping his news.
And you just make no sense. My topic. Well, they caught on fast. I had two actually. I think I can only remember one right now. It's probably the right one to go with anyways, given the context of what we've been doing. But I'm gonna look at the other one anyways. Well, except now you've... Okay. Maybe hang on a second. Hang on. Loading. Locke was going to be one of them. Because I wasn't sure that you would have watched it yet, so I was going to have to do my solo. The other thing, and I mentioned this to you before, again, not on air. We're going to start by talking about Star Wars books, which is a strange place to start, but it will broaden into just a general... I wanted to dig deeper into the literary discussion we attempted to have, which I felt was more surface level than I was meaning to get to. Because, similar to film, I think there is a similar dichotomy in literature of substance versus technical skill.
Sure.
And I thought we might discuss that because I think I mentioned it, that I was reading the first of the trilogy of the sort of Clone Wars finale books. It's sort of the Rise of Darth Vader trilogy, you could call it, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so I finished the first one, which is everything that happens right up until, like literally right up until the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. And then I'm currently reading the Revenge of the Sith novelization, and I started about a little bit down on the first book because it's very dry. But I said, it was redeemed by the fact that it dealt with, additional history and stuff that I thought was valuable.
It was a setup book, essentially.
Yeah. And I remember thinking, and I even said to you when I had just started reading the other book, that I was like, this one's already better. And it is, but not universally. Because the thing I've realized is the first one, very dry, very much a kind of... Essentially, it's an almost exclusively exposition book. Where it's like the action is this happens, this happens, this happens, and it's clear to, like, it lets you know what happens. It's not, because I think bad writing is just sort of incomprehensible most of the time.
Right.
And this is, I would say, average writing, where it's like, I can understand what's happening. It's certainly clear. It's just in... What? Okay, I didn't expect this. This could be in the wrong direction then. It's just... it doesn't evoke anything. It's just very like, yeah, okay, I understand what happens in the scene, but I don't really know how I'm supposed to feel about any of this. Whereas, because of the fact that this is where I'm thinking we'll get into a degree of literary theory, because the way you write about something gives you the sort of deeper context of it, rather than just knowing what happens.
Sure.
And that I feel like this... Oh! Okay, so this may not have actually been a bad idea. Well, okay, I guess we'll give it a try then. I thought maybe this was taking me to a different area. So, I guess... I'm not sure how else to describe it. The quote that I thought of when I was thinking about this, and thinking about bringing it up specifically, was one of C.S. Lewis when he describes that's so stupid, I can't fall worth nothing. Did you... literally, it's like you fall 10 feet and that'll kill you.
Right, yeah, 4 feet from the roof to the ground.
Very dumb. So the quote that I see if you agree with, because I think it's what I'm getting at, is C.S. Lewis, where he says, I'm going to have to paraphrase because I don't know the wording, but he says something like, don't describe something as terrible, describe it so that it terrifies us. Don't say it's delightful, describe it so that we think how delightful when we read it.
Right.
And I think that's how you bring across how a person should feel, by saying, you don't say, this thing was a terrifying creature, and it's like, no, you describe it in matter-of-fact terms, but I mean, as in, don't tell us how we should feel about it. Describe it accurately so that we can visualize it, and then you can color your description such that it evokes those emotions, because then it will be genuine rather than just, okay, I'm supposed to feel like it's scary. And then it sort of feels like you're being told that rather than feeling it for yourself. That's what I think I'm realizing, is that this book, I think, does much better at that. And this is where I thought, because when I brought up last time the sort of Tolkien aspect, when I think we had a sort of a misunderstanding of what, we did the same thing.
Of what thinking I could land on it without
what
jumping too
Tolkien-esque
far.
means to you and to me.
So
Because I'm asking, what I'm trying to get down to, and what I was trying to get down to, is purely stylistic. As in, not content-based, purely on style. Would Tolkien still be a stylistic choice, or do you like him because of his content? Like, and I'm talking like word for word, not what the sentence is saying, but what the sentence
structure is.
Like because there is poetic prose, as much as that's a contradiction in terms.
Right.
There is prose that has an element of a certain eloquence, not exactly in the truly poetry sense. But, I mean, flowery often sounds flippant. But I mean, for lack of a better term, a sense of like just evocative is a word I like to use, because it's basically language that evokes the kind of feeling that you would expect it to evoke, at least the subject matter. And so, where do you rank? I mean, not Tolkien specifically, but it's like, what would be your... I would imagine we have a similar style in that we both probably prefer more evocative, flowery, for lack of a better term, language in prose.
I agree. I think that as far as stylistic choices of literature or of...
Because I'm not sure that I would call Tolkien flowery, as much as he's probably more academic in the way he writes. Which might sound... I mean, maybe I'm...
I don't know that I agree with you, because especially in some of his, like, more periphery works, like the Silmarillion, things like that, flowery in that he takes sentence after sentence to explain one element of something.
Okay, I walked over the railing?
First of all, that seemed like he was glitching. Second of all, the fact that you died from that is a bit
again,
absurd.
you die from falling 2 inches, but I didn't push jump, so I walked through the railing. But I don't know that I would just... Because is that just long-winded or flowery? Because flowery is a certain element of, like, take out what is actually happening in the scene. Is this an appealing sentence based on the words in it? And
I could see what you mean by academic at that point.
Because that's what I like... And I mean, it's a difficult thing to strip the substance of a literary work from its style, because they usually are so interlinked. Mm-hmm. But I'm just like... have you, like, in reading Tolkien or in anyone, do you occasionally find yourself going, that's a really good line? And I mean that in the sense of, like, not just what is being said, but how it's being said. Like, that's a really, for lack of a better term, that's a very poetic way of putting that sentiment. Because I actually record those, where, like, if I'm reading something and something strikes me as like, wow, that was a really, really good... Not just, I like the point it's getting across, but like that was a really succinct and eloquent way of putting that.
Sure.
Now, by the way, don't go further down, because it says right here you're on the right level. Because the X is an X. When it's not the right level, it's the little triangle. So I'd get the map out and see where you're supposed to go. Well, that's not helpful at all. See... Okay, so it's saying you have to get through I think you have to go down in... Can you actually call an elevator? Like, is there an elevator? Because you were in the elevator shaft, but we're going to have to go through the elevator door to get to that place. So can you see an elevator door? I figured it would.
I was thinking maybe it was at the bottom and I was far enough down that I was going to be able to actually fall. Yeah, you think that.
Because, I mean, it's real dumb. Does that strike you, or is that something you look for in reading?
I do. I think it's a subconscious thing, though. I don't know that I actually give any sort of conscious thought to the literary style or type. I don't
analyze sentences as they come, but if a sentence is like, "Wow, that's a really," because I think it's a degree of a combination of succinctness, but also
effectiveness.
Yeah, like eloquence. Like, can you say something in very precise and succinct language, but also to really drive it home with, like, I mean, you could call it loaded in a sense, but it's like choosing the exact right words that pack a punch of a meaning punch, as it were. I think
my preference is when authors can carry me into the story where because a good author is going to guide not just the information you are getting, but also the information you are asking for. Does that make sense? Like, as an author, I thought you had that one.
It's so stupid.
Go again. You were really close.
I should have gone down the ladder, but I thought...
in that they have to guide... It's a bit of a mentalism, because they have to guide what you are going to ask in order to then later answer it. I think a good author, in my opinion, does that. They go, They kind of create a space in which you go, well, I wonder what's going to happen to this, and then
but that's plot based, which would be a part of the substance. It's like, laying the foundation for something to happen later.
Yes, but I think there are certainly times I don't see that in books. Like, where I feel like the literary style may be more focused on the environment, or maybe on the character development or whatever. And when you do that, that's all well and good. But if you're not guiding your audience where you want them to be thinking, then you're going to end up with a very predictable story, not because of the story itself being benign or predictable, but because your writing style isn't, you're kind of bearing your lead, if that makes sense. But in that way, I think that's the only like literary style specifically that I would say I particularly have a appreciation for, or like I really need this from a book, is when they actually can effectively lead me without it making it feel like it's obvious.
But that still is a substance argument.
Yeah, I mean,
So do you maybe not really care much about like a language based?
if you're talking about like syntax and things like that, I don't
literally
know
I almost not quite to literal like grammatical level, but the
So
choice of the specific words in a specific context.
that I certainly appreciate.
Okay, so I came out on the wrong level, but
I like when
so I'm
they
gonna have to
use
activate the
words
elevator
that
somehow.
are
Unless I can.
I actually just have an appreciation for words that aren't used very often, simply because I like adding them to my vocabulary. That's like something that that's a side note and just a benefit to me. But I think also, you know, to your point about your previous quote with Lewis, it's one thing to explain something with a lot of adjectives and
come on.
descriptors.
Don't tell me I can't open the door. I can open all the other doors.
Why haven't you opened this before?
That's so stupid. I can open the one down there. I'm gonna die if I fall, aren't I? This is okay. This is the same. That is a door.
Yeah.
This is a door. I can only open this door? That's so stupid. That's where I need to be, guys.
Is there, if you go into that space,
I can
though,
go.
is there like
Okay, so I can come out the stairs. I can
was
come
about
out
to
here
say
and go
the
up the
stairs,
stairs.
yeah,
That's
I guess I was
kinda-
about to
This
say.
is dumb. Except they're gonna be hacked. At least I can do that.
So that I appreciate, because I think not only do you get to add words to your vocabulary, but also when you can tell me in one word something that it takes maybe another author, because they haven't spent the time to actually have that degree of attention to detail with like a word that's actually hits the nail right on the head of what you want to say. Great, I'm all about that. And I don't think I don't pay attention to it, but like I said before, I think it's more of a subconscious thing. I certainly do notice when sentences are cumbersome.
Well, it's a bit of the you mostly notice it when it doesn't work kind of thing.
Right. If it's...
Oh, come on.
I don't like sing-songy. Like when it starts to feel a little
When
poetic.
it feels like it's trying, but again, I think that usually stems from, I think the precise word aspect is the right way to view it, because it's about the right word, because you can make up, or at least you can attempt to make up for not having the right word by just lots of words. It's like I mean, that's why I think flowery is often a negative connotation, because it often means that you are attempting to make something seem more meaningful by multiplying it. Like, right. I'm going to put a bunch of fancy words rather than the few words that are very precise.
Right.
Whereas, so I mean, that's where I think there's a fake poetry to it rather than a genuine poeticness.
Right. Well, that's what I mean by sing-songy. It's similar, flowery, just kind of like, okay, this is... I feel like a butterfly is going to fly out of the book. Like, it's like, it gets to the point that I'm like, all right, you hold him down, and I'll say some awful things about the world to him. Like,
well, I don't think it's not like it's naive. I mean, you can be overly flowery in attempting to describe something sad.
Sure, but I'm just saying...
It's not naively, like, positive.
But I also think, too, that I have an aversion, for sure, to books that...
Well, because that's what your English teachers always said. What? Okay. This isn't where I needed to be. This isn't at all where I needed to be.
Meet Hughes downstairs, or you could just go straight into their hideout.
Where am I even?
It says right there, you are here. Up there.
Oh, I'm underneath the marker. Well, that didn't help me worth jack. What? Okay. How do I get here? I think this was the closest place I was. Can I get over here? don't think so. Well, do I have to go back in?
It is when you don't.
Well, let me go back in.
It is when you.
Without hacking in. That's stupid. I just came out this door from this side. I'm gonna have to get back in from the other. Ah! I wondered. I didn't. This is dumb.
It's something that you notice when it's not good.
Yeah.
But I would say,
and that is what I would say.
The best.
I noticed that in the first book, but the reason.
So cumbersome, like just kind of.
Yeah. It's a little like
stiff.
Yes. It felt like it had. I mean, for lack of a better term, it had no romance. Not in the literal sense, but like.
There are times
it was
that
just
I'll read
dry description.
Yeah, I was about to say there are times I'm reading somebody and it feels a little bit more
There's
like
no
a high
flourish.
school like.
Yeah, flourish
paper.
I guess is maybe the right word.
Flourish is a good word for it. Yeah.
But I will say this about the other.
Did I stop reading? No, I did not.
The first book, I am realizing sadly by contrast, which is going to seed my next opinion, had a much better understanding of character voice. Because the thing that kept me going through it is all of the stuff that was between characters, especially the characters that don't get much screen time in the films. It still felt like them. So when you have the points that are like Count Dooku speaking, it's like, this sounds... I can hear Count Dooku's voice in my head because this sounds like the kind of thing he would say. And that's a very difficult thing because that's... I would almost argue that's not as much of a writing skill as it is... And I'm saying technically a writing skill as much as it is a understanding of your subject matter.
Right.
Like if you understand the character really well, you may not be the best writer at other things, but you might be able to write really good dialogue because you've got the sense of characters on lock. I mean, I think it was that guy turning around. Okay, well, I guess we're giving up.
Putting you to sleep. Say something. Ah!
Say something, I'm gonna cold cock you. I think the reason we got shot last time was not because I hacked, but because I took too long and the other guy turned around.
Could be.
So that was what got me through. It's like, okay, I'm hearing these characters' voices when they say these things because the dialogue, with the exception, and I think this is true of this as well, but more so, no one seems to know how to write Anakin well. And that may be due to the fact that George didn't either.
On a dialogue level or on a description level?
Yes, I mean, because that's what you usually mean when you say writing a character, not necessarily what they do, but what they say, writing for them perhaps better.
Right.
Is that, so both books struggled with him specifically, because I think the trouble is, I think people, this was my actual first big qualm with the Clone Wars, is why I didn't watch it when I was a kid, is because of all the characters, Anakin is the most different. He does not feel like him from the films. And that kind of bothered me because I was a big film fan at the time. And I think that the problem is people are trying to sort of force cohesion between Clone Wars Anakin and film Anakin, who are very different and have very different personalities. And so it ends up just feeling, I just need to get in, guys, let me in.
Access granted.
Bye-bye, let me in. So it just feels into Force War, he'll be like weirdly angsty in one scene and then making kind of dumb jokes in the next. And I'm just like...
Does the author birdwalk at all? Like where it's like, what does this have to do with anything at all that we were just now talking about?
Not in the first one. The first book didn't do that because, again, it was very dry and just sort of sequential.
Because I find that people that are either overly dry or disorganized, it's actually symptoms of the same exact thing.
Well, the argument could be made that Tolkien birdwalks. It's just that he somehow manages to wrap it in at the end.
And you know he does it by BSing, too. And that's actually not disconnected.
Well, I mean...
Because it's the male has a baby, and you're fired. No, I think it's something that I appreciate, but it's not the only time I've ever actually spent time giving any sort of attention or focus to actual syntax and sentence structure and stuff like that is when I'm doing like biblical studies, and that's a different kind of issue.
Oh, don't tell me I can't.
Interestingly,
I can't
though,
go back.
that in itself is fascinating because I think it does bring some personality to the writing that otherwise isn't there.
Well, that's precisely what I'm describing in this. It's like, this is what makes an author have a personality in their writing.
Right, that's what I meant. Like, there's
the kinds of additions you make rather than just, it happened like this. It's like if the way you use, specific types of words and the types of metaphors and things, it's like, that's what gives an author a style.
Yeah.
So I've had an inversion as I foreshadowed, and sadly I can't get out of here. So I was gonna just go back the way I came, but I didn't realize that the ladders didn't go all the way up. So I am Jose'd.
No offense to any Jose's out there.
Why'd you do it, Jose?
Why'd you do it, Jose?
But anyway, so I'm gonna have to go back out into the street. I thought I fell and died.
Croque, Jose. No.
This is very dumb. The second book, much better in the style. The language of it is much more like, this is compelling, even in just the word choice. It's a lot more evocative. It has more flourish, you could say.
I would imagine that a writer probably gets more into their own flow once they write something.
Well, yes, but I think that the guy who wrote the other one is not like a new writer, so I mean, I might be wrong about that, but this one's much better, but character voice, sadly, takes the opposite and is worse. Which is sad because I was thinking, oh, this one's going to be so much better. And it's like, okay, it's balanced out to being kind of the same because it just fills in for the struggles of the other while failing at what it did better at. I wouldn't say failing, that's a bit strong, but the trouble in this is everyone talks like Anakin. But what I mean by that is there's angst at random moments and humor at random moments, and it does not feel like it gels.
Consistency.
Well, because that's the thing about character voice is it's like you want to make every character where you don't have to say, this person said this. You can just have a conversation with multiple characters saying their piece, and if it's good, you should be able to tell this was this character because that sounds like them.
It ends up becoming like one of those little pull string farms. And Uncle Ben said...
And so the trouble with this is I am... stuck is the trouble with this. I don't know where I'm...
This is, you could dehydraulic his...
boat! I just stuck my face in his butt.
He wanted you to get right in there, too.
He probably didn't
He, bent over. He was like...
I don't think he even thought that I was the criminal who was sneaking in. I thought he just shot me because I was in his butt. Just going, back off, perv! Broke my butt.
It makes it so much funnier that he's just not bent.
Well, maybe I did. I shorted out his butt.
You mean your butt or my butt or individual butts?
What? Controller. So, yeah, none of these characters have different voices. Everyone talks the same. And this is what sort of made me, and I'm curious about your perspective as a non-Star Wars devotee. It made me realize that there is not just individual character voices, but there is a general Star Wars tone. That I don't think I realized was distinct. And maybe, I'm curious about if that, as someone who's not as avowed of a fan, is that something you can sense, where it's like these have a different tone that is distinctly their own?
Well, I certainly haven't read any of the literature.
No, I'm saying that even the movies, I would say, which I would take as the principal canon.
Have a tone.
I know some of the books are canon. I don't actually think these ones are anymore because Disney, but...
I mean...
No.
Can I trace it to like one particular thing that it goes across the board? I think that's a bit.
Well, I didn't say that. I'm just saying, like, just the sense of, like, it has a style all its own. So here's Buttman. Now he's weird bird feet man. Why would you, if you're going to get mechanical legs, would you go with those or would you just get regular ones? Those might have advantages. I can't think of them, but they might. I suppose if you had claw-like feet, you could probably stand up in a stiff breeze or something, but I don't know.
Your whole body's blowing over. I know that obviously one of the things that George emphasized from the beginning that I think is distinct is that he always wanted to be something that was in the same way that in like a large city, people just assume that there's kind of hustle and bustle and there's constantly people moving around and like there's this kind of globalized, especially like on port, like a port city, for instance. He made almost planets like that, where he had such a broad vision of, okay, there's a whole galaxy and everyone knows it. And so there's this kind of...
Which makes sense for the world, of course.
Right. Again, there's this kind of globalism, certainly, that I think is communicated well within Star Wars. But I don't know that there's anything else that's that, I would say, distinct.
Well, perhaps I'll see then if you agree with my opinion, because you might not or you might just not care. I would... This may not be the right word, but the first word that comes to mind is...
You can't just shoot me like a...
Well, you can, actually. I think you'll find.
World's precious.
The word that came to mind first was austere, which may not be right. But the problem I have, especially with this book more than the first, because the first one it just kind of felt, again, sort of flat, and again, Anakin, I felt like they were trying to combine Clone Wars and films, which didn't combine well. In this, everyone talks the same, and they don't talk like Star Wars characters. And that's not a thing I think I would have ever noticed before, that, like, Star Wars characters talk a certain way. Because this has very earthly humor, which sounds silly, because, of course, it's like, an earthly book. But, I mean, it feels like it has a modern sense of humor.
Gotcha.
The things that it tries to make jokes out of, I'm like, no one in Star Wars would say that, because that requires...
So, culturally, it felt very...
Yeah, it feels culturally... American, or maybe not American, but like Western, and it's just
almost
like
sounds like also like on a time frame level that it didn't really work.
Well, I mean, they don't specifically make like reference to jokes that wouldn't make sense without without like American context. But I mean, just like phrases and ways of saying something was like these people. The thing I think I would say it is, and because maybe austere is not the right word, but I think Star Wars at its best, because again, I think it doesn't always do this, at its best, it always has a sense of gravity to it, where it's taking itself seriously. And again, we've talked about this before, the concept of something taking itself seriously, but I actually thought someone made the point about Lord of the Rings, which I thought what made me realize, and maybe this is why I like Star Wars in similar proportion to Lord of the Rings, is that what made the Lord of the Rings great is that it was totally unashamed of being very serious. It didn't try to cheapen itself and like we have to sneak some jokes in there because otherwise people won't. Right. Yeah, it accepts that. I mean, in some ways, it places a demand that says, this is what we're going to be about. These are our themes. This is the stuff we're going to explore. And we think it's worth exploring, so we invite you to explore it. It doesn't feel like it has to cheapen it and say, we'll entice you along with these sort of jokes and bits here and there. Did you have a strategy?
I wasn't even paying attention. I was listening to you. I'm sorry.
It's because I'm just so dynamic.
I don't know that I'm not familiar enough with Star Wars to... I mean, I can identify a few things. You've seen
the films, though, because that's all I'm asking. Because the films, I still consider to be the principal reference.
And
I'm expecting the books to conform to the films, not anything else.
If it felt... Again, I think a lot of this would be a subconscious thing, because I think there's language in
Well,
itself.
the subconscious is only subconscious until you
think about it. I know, but I mean, I could probably tell you when something didn't feel like it.
Well, that's what I think this has done. Is I don't think I would have had this thought process until I realized this doesn't feel like Star Wars. Although I suppose
putting some Western character in the John Wick film.
Disney films,
he comes in and starts.
Yeah, I would say that the Disney films had enough other problems that I don't think I realized this, but I think they had the same issue, is an attempt at relevance and modern humor that doesn't fit. I think that was the least of their problems. Okay, this was the strategy I attempted and got turkey shot.
Turkey shot.
And so maybe this is just the first time that it's brought that to my consciousness that I went, there is a thing that feels like Star Wars and this isn't it.
What's interesting is I can tell you offhand that it's definitely distinct from like Star Trek.
Well, everyone would agree with
Star Trek.
That's why the ancient rivalry.
Its theme and tone is very much exploratory
and very
Star Wars,
utopian.
Right, where Star Wars is far more
and almost melodramatic,
kind of globalized, mega.
Well, it's a space opera in a sense,
right?
It's not necessarily the original space opera, but it's.
What would that be?
People say it's Dune. I'm not in a position to argue because I haven't read Dune, but Dune was written before Star Wars came out.
Did you see the movie yet?
No, because I haven't decided whether or not I should read the book first or after, but it's a big book, so I'm a little intimidated to okay, I can't see the film until I read this, which means I will never see the film. I am not a turkey! Oh! What? This might work. Serpentine and jump like a friggin' kangaroo. Well, it works. Going in the sewers, except probably not wise. I'm going into this building, because civilians should get shot. If I'm gonna get shot, I should spread the shooting. Alright. Well, okay. I got out. And I don't think I'm where I need to be. What's outside this building? Because I'm gonna need to... Let's see if I can get on the roof, because I gotta get to where I was. What was I saying?
So... Then in comparing C.S. Lewis to Tolkien, are you saying Tolkien...
What? Was I doing that?
Well, you earlier were talking about
Whoa!
that.
Hey! This was the right way! I thought you had a tube coming out of your head, and I was a little concerned.
Mr. Jensen, right?
Mr. Jensen, I decided to get Boingo knees. What do you think?
I'm in charge of
well, her trench coat is a bit odd, but it's got a sort of
so was that your initial question was on a tonal level? Do you think Tolkien has its own writing style versus...
Well, no, I was interested not exclusively about Tolkien. I was just curious if you even had the same sort of thoughts. I'm sorry, I chose to be unreceptive, whatever that means. Because again, we may be discovering a theme that perhaps the technical aspects of an art form are less your concern than the subject. It's same with the film comparison, where it's I am interested not only in the contents of the book, but in the writing, the actual technical writing of it. And I wasn't sure if maybe you just didn't care as much.
I can appreciate it when it's there, but that's certainly not one of the driving forces of me reading or consuming.
Well, that was sort of what I was wondering about. But I guess I'll accept. We got nothing better to do, I guess.
Okay, I'll help out.
Excellent. Here's the
trying to figure out how to tie this all up, because I've gone off on several rabbit trails.
Proprietary information about Panchaea. We've been able to convince them to sell it.
Well, I suppose to wrap up the Star Wars specific,
the meeting is supposed to take...
what do you think? Gravity is the right word? Because, in the Lord of the Rings comparison, I think they both, again, Star Wars fails at this sometimes. Star Wars is, in fact, at its worst when it fails to do this, which is, again, many people would say about the prequels, is when it attempts to be funny as a means of, lightening the mood, or so to speak.
Right.
That's when you get stuff like the Jar Jar Binks things, where it's we're going to put some jokes in as a means of, counteracting the rest of the heavy, dry plot. And it's that ends up just feeling cheap, And I think personally it's because it feels inserted. And again, in this case, it doesn't feel like it comes from Star Wars. It feels like it comes from modern literary style. And so you just insert it and it doesn't feel right, and then it's not, and then it fails to be funny and fails to be engaging.
Right. But I feel like that's a downfall or a pitfall with humor that's cheap, or it's used as
and
filler,
this is actually, again,
fodder
this
for the canon. You're going, no.
Yeah, this reminded me of, in fact, while the conversation's going, I may just have enough time to find it because I'd like to quote it exactly again. But the quote from the Romantic Manifesto that I said, I'm not going to have time because the conversation's over and it's lost somewhere in here. I can't think of it specifically, but the gist of it is something, and I wish I could remember because, again, it's a matter of just the right words to say it. But in the Romantic Manifesto, she says something like, a work of art that makes a mockery of itself is a fraud on the audience, or something like that.
Oh, yeah, I do recall.
We're basically saying, and I think that's the difference is, obviously, the original Star Wars had humor. It was a funny movie, it wasn't a comedy.
Yeah, but it was natural.
Exactly,
and it felt true to the characters.
And it happened because of interpersonal chemistry with characters.
There was
never an external
character. Right,
It wasn't we're inserting comedy. It was this character is either making fun of this character or telling a joke to this character. It's diegetic. I like that word because it's a very useful word, and I actually think that it's a fascinating philosophical word, that just the fact that we have a word for such a bizarre phenomenon.
Yeah.
But that's a change it for another time. Okay, I see a thing that's telling me to do something, but I don't see where I'm supposed to go to do it.
No, rather than it feeling...
it feels as though the audience is meant to laugh at it.
Right.
Not, this is funny and we appreciate the humor of these characters. It's, aren't we being silly right now?
Right.
And I think stuff like the Jar Jar Binks specifically, it's like, why did people hate that? It's like, because it was making a mockery of itself.
Right.
And there are moments in this, I read it, in fact, just today, a moment that I thought was an example of it, and I can't remember it exactly, where the comedy actually, I almost feel like, I wonder if there is even this term, or perhaps if I should coin it. It's almost like a ironic comedy, not in what you might be thinking of what that might mean, but I mean, it's the kind of comedy that arises from characters not knowing, but the audience knowing.
Right.
Because I mean, that's not the strict definition of irony, but that's one of the definitions of irony. Specifically, it's, I forget if it's like poetic irony or something, but it's basically when the audience knows something a character doesn't. And it almost feels like the humor that it's trying relies on that, where I don't think that even a character within this would have laughed at what just happened.
Right.
I'm expected to laugh because I have a greater sense of context, which then makes it feel as though I'm laughing at this.
But it's stage breaking, though, is the problem. It feels like I'm disconnected from the story.
It's not full. It's not like a true fourth wall break.
Right.
But it is sort of this is only funny to me as the reader of a book.
Well, but what
this wouldn't have been funny to the characters in this circumstance.
But to my previous point, it draws attention.
It makes you remember. Oh, this is a book. I'm reading.
Right, exactly.
And that, I think, is the problem. And that's I think, again, even the modern Star Wars films do this, where it's like, this is only funny because of a modern sense of humor. This isn't funny because of what's happening in the show or in the movie or in the scene. This is funny because of an external source.
Right.
And thus it's not funny, actually. And that's the problem I have had with this, is that it's much better in its style and in its tone and all the other things, except I think the dialogue is worse. Because not only does it not have distinct character voice, which is a thing you want and usually need, but I don't feel like it has the voice of Star Wars, because that kind of humor, again, why is there people alarmed? Oh, because I was never supposed to be here. Whoops. that kind of humor had never had a place in Star Wars, which is why people didn't like the prequels as much.
Right.
And I admit those are the weakest parts of the prequels, are the parts trying to be funny.
Right.
Because there's funny parts of the prequels that are funny because this character says something funny to another character who laughs. It's like, that's diegetic humor rather than me laughing when nobody in the scene would be.
Right.
I've got several things to search in here. So, I mean, so that's what I mean. When I say gravity, I mean it's that sense of taking itself seriously and not cheapening itself with laughs for the sake of bribing, essentially, the audience into continuing to read.
Right.
Do you agree that that's inaccurate, or would you say, I mean... Because, again, I'm wondering, is this only my opinion?
It's inaccurate. What? That
say am I only feeling this way because I am a Star Wars aficionado?
No, I think that's very fair, honestly, and I think that it speaks to what I was saying without really.
What? Well, okay, they didn't make that clear.
Because when the author can take seriously the fact that they ought to be guiding your. If I can use the way of our mental focus as maybe like a spotlight.
Well, yes.
If you are moving that about intentionally in the story to keep people's focus on one thing or another, then that's great. But the minute that you do something like that, stage-breaking humor, again, it puts the spotlight back onto the reader and they go, oh yeah, I'm reading a book. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
And that in itself is a jarring experience. It's a little bit like, okay, now I'm no longer engrossed in the story. Whereas a well-placed joke within the context of interpersonal play with characters,
it builds the sense of character. Again, usually, like when you think of who are the funny characters in the original Star Wars, it's like, well, okay, Han Solo has the sort of sarcastic humor. Luke's a bit more of the kind of giddy, silly humor at times.
Right.
The conflict between both of them and between Leia, who's more serious, sometimes it's funny.
Right.
But that's because of characters, so the humor that arises only deepens our sense of who these characters are. Whereas, anytime Jar Jar does something stupid, we just think about Jar Jar being stupid. It's like, that doesn't... I mean, yes, I suppose that drives a certain degree of character, but it's not an interesting part of the character.
Well,
this guy doesn't have an issue with me. This guy doesn't have a problem. The other guys will kill me on sight. Am I supposed to kill people? Oh, I am. I'm not incapacitate, not necessarily kill them. Well, my guess is once I start, they're gonna all start to react. So I probably have to time this appropriately. What? Oh, okay. The button prompt didn't come up, so I wasn't sure that was gonna happen when I pressed it.
You're looking at the back of his neck.
Okay, well, it happened anyways. I don't want to... I mean... The game tells me they're terrorists, so I'm going to believe it. I'm playing Spec Ops The Line again. No! The game says you're bad, so I have to kill you. Okay, you're not... You're wearing a suit, pal. He did some kind of Elvis grade split when he died, but I died at the same time. So that's, I suppose, does that wrap up my Star Wars topic? It kind of does, specifically about Star Wars and feeling... I'm curious if you think that my comparison between it and Lord of the Rings... Because I know that we both hold Lord of the Rings at the same value, but you don't hold Star Wars at that value, does that then seem overly generous to you?
To say that...
To compare them, that I think... Not, of course, in pretty much any ways, other than that. I think they both, at their best, are unabashedly serious about relatively complex themes and...
Certainly.
Gravity, I think they demand a certain degree of attention, and they're not ashamed of presenting you with very serious and very heady topics.
Yeah.
And they trust you enough to grasp and follow along and appreciate. Again, they shouldn't cheapen because they don't want you to feel like we have to entice you with dumb jokes in order for you to get to us to engage, when in reality, they have enough respect for you to say, this is interesting. We think it's interesting. We think you'll find it interesting. So let's explore it. And it has trust that that's enough.
Right. Well, it reminds me a bit of I can't remember. I think we were on this topic a while ago, but the idea that when you started seeing a lot of the shift from even like major corporations and companies like Apple and things like that, they used to be, their commercials looked significantly different back in the 1970s, 80s than they did in the modern 2000s, because they started acting like the public was like there was an entirely new iPhone where the upgrade was literally, this one comes in cool colors, and it's like they're literally communicating that that's what they think of the public. But the funny thing is, when the public affirms, yeah, that's how easy it is to market to us, they continue marketing like that. Yeah. And then what it does is it reinforces this notion that the public is that easy to please. Whereas if we started being more critical of that kind of stuff...
Again, it comes down to the conversation we had a while ago of demanding nice things.
Right. But I mean, even within a literary context, if we stop engaging the literary buffoons, or I would compare it to like maybe the court jester, where it's like it's the lowest
I don't know that I'd make that comparison, because the court, I think there's a certain degree of sophistication in the court jester thing, but that's more on a philosophical.
Well, maybe I'm not as familiar with
Alan
that,
Watts
so
has a
maybe
whole lecture about. There's an entire lecture called "The Joker" and why the court jester is actually one of the most significant members of the court, because only the court jester can tell the truth. Because essentially, his ability to not take himself seriously allows him to say things no one else can.
Sure. If there's a character that's like that in a book or a movie, I'm more
arguably that's what a character like Han Solo is.
Right.
It's not exactly... I wouldn't call it self-aware, because I think self-aware is part of the problem, where it draws attention to itself being a written thing or a film.
Right.
Like, it draws attention to, this is a film gag. Laugh now.
Right.
So I don't think it's self-aware, but Han Solo was very much...
I'm going to say the thing.
Everyone. Yeah,
anyway.
It's like everyone's thinking it in this context, and so is the audience.
Right.
The problem is when you say the audience is thinking this, so I'm going to say it, but no one in the scene reasonably would.
Right.
And Han was that kind of character, because Han was sort of the outsider who thought all of the magic nonsense was silly, and it's like he was in some sense the closest to the audience insert.
Right, but I
think,
again...
he could have those opinions, but again, it was diegetic because it made sense for his character to have those
exactly.
opinions.
When you can do it as the author, with the spotlight of the audience's focus still being engrossed in the book, and I think that modern books, anything that's written to sound modern, ends up suffering from this, that they assume the reader is not going to pick up on more fine nuance and sophisticated humor, which is tragedy. It's
but the problem
tragedy.
is we may be getting... I mean, the longer that goes on, we might actually get to a point where it'll be true, which would be the worst tragedy.
Well, the only way to offset though is to make it not true in your own context, and anybody that you have any sort of circle of
there's a degree
in.
of... Not that I don't know this specifically about this work, but I mean, and I think it's also too strong for the current context, but I do think it's a warning of what could happen, is the idea of Brave New World, where eventually when the public has become so desensitized to the meaninglessness of things around them, it will eventually reach a singularity where meaning can't even be reintroduced, because the people won't be able to engage it. And it's like there was I don't know the exact quote, because again, I haven't read it, I've only heard it discussed, in which the sort of principal villain discussing with the protagonist of Brave New World talks about how even in a society like this, you couldn't reintroduce something like Shakespeare because it would just go over people's heads.
Right.
The people have become so desensitized in a cyclical way of, we fed them crap, they ate the crap, so now all they can eat is the crap. It's like we've devolved so far from any sense of symbolic meaning that no one could have it even if we gave it to them.
We have to make it obvious now because otherwise they'll trip right over it without even realizing
And
it
I mean,
too.
so I don't think we're at that point. Again, I think that's too strong. No, one
No,
saw
that's
that.
true.
Okay, so they saw the other one, but not that. Okay. But I do think it's like that's a valid risk for the future. I don't think we're at risk of doing it now, but unless things change, of course. And I mean, again, I've said this, good films get made. It's just I'm sad that they are the minority of films.
Well, we've covered a lot as far as that, this topic I feel like has connected us to some other topics that we've been talking about ongoing. But really the reality is it's our responsibility and obligation if we want to see the culture shift for the better and for our advantage so that industries start actually putting our needs and values first again, which is that we have to start proving that we actually give a crap about the stuff that we're engaging and reading. Because if you don't and you continue going, we'll swallow whatever you give us, they're going to give you the easiest and lowest common denominator.
That's why we describe our discontent with a lot of stuff that gets made. But I do wonder how much of an effect does that really truly have? Why do I still see an X? Is he up there? Maybe he is. But because the trouble is Disney will make money when they make trash films, even if I don't see them. And maybe this is the whole, every vote counts kind of argument where, is that truly the case? Maybe not, but it has to be upheld because otherwise it will collapse. It's like, does your individual vote matter? Maybe really not in a statistical sense, but if everyone felt that way, then no one would vote, and then no one's vote would matter.
Right, exactly.
Oh.
Did you...
Ah! I don't know why you didn't take the shot in that time. I thought I was out of energy, so I didn't... Oh, what happened? It's got Saturday Night Fever. Okay, so I got one more to get. So maybe it's the idea that we just have to keep sort of that narrative of it does matter if you don't go see it because... But the problem also is I do think we are beginning the descent of people not caring. Because, I mean,
how do we inspire people
the
to
only
care
people you
is the
could
question.
convince to say, hey, you shouldn't go see that, this Disney film because it's actually really kind of insipid and unchallenging and it doesn't do what it should do as a film. It's of inferior... What? It's saying so he is down there. Well, I knocked everyone out. Oh, it's further down. Okay. I was going up and I should have gone down. I don't think it would be hard to convince those people, but what about the people who just don't agree? It's like there's going to be people who go, well, and in fact, I mean, sadly, I've had conversations with these people where it's like they acknowledge that something is inferior, but they also don't care enough to not bother. And that's where I go, I don't know how you convince them. I mean, other than I suppose to inspire, it's like, wouldn't this be better? But if they don't care about it being better, then maybe they won't care even if it could be. And
I think there's going to be times that, especially the creators of art, are going to have to spin their wheels a bit in forcing the public to...
Okay, what?
To engage
on
a
I'm
different
looking for
level.
A chip. I have to pick something off.
I mean, is it more work when you're reading a book that requires you to look up a word every now and then because you don't happen to know it, and then you get to add that later to your, knowledge base? Sure, it's more work in the moment, but is it better for long-term enjoyment? Yes. Yeah. But again, people are going to have to kind of feel the pangs of feeling underqualified before they actually are provoked to do anything about it. Because unless somebody... this is going to come off as incredibly harsh and survival of the fittesty. Unless someone feels incompetent... Jordan Peterson talks about this.
Well, the pain...
Unless someone feels incompetent, they're not going to adjust.
Well, and it's that idea of... I don't know who first said it, but the whole concept of you don't change until the pain of changing is less than the pain of staying where you are.
Right.
Which means... And I guess that's the problem. I mean, when it comes to something as admittedly frivolous does seem a bit too severe, but something as admittedly insignificant feels the same way. It's not life or death that, quality art doesn't get made. Not truly, in the survival sense. The argument could be made that on sort of a spiritual sense it kind of is, but to people, how would you convince? I guess maybe that's what you have to convince people of, that aspect of it. I can't go that way, but like, how would you? To someone who doesn't care about, like, I don't care that it's not that great. I don't know how you could make them. I guess unless you would manage to somehow convince them that it actually matters.
I don't think you can make them as much as you can be the one that says, well, then we're not going to interact or have any sort of...
Well, so you're attempting to sort of socially... Yeah, I mean, that's
the only way to do it.
The idea of basically sort of this... But that descends a bit into the sort of snobbery aspect.
No, and I'm not... Well, see, we're back to class systems again. No, It's not that as much as it is... You grow past people sometimes, and I don't think in a bad-spirited or mean-spirited way. If you continue living your life... I'm actually
astonished that worked.
If you continue living your life in such a way that just is like, well, I have now a higher degree of confidence, knowledge, whatever you want to call it.
There is, in a sense, this is the
humor.
Sort of the problem of enlightenment, in a way, is that it does separate you from the unenlightened.
Right.
And I mean, that sounds perhaps a bit poncy to say that about yourself, but I mean, the element is true that's like... It's a bit of the surround yourself with who you want, with who you'd like to be, where you go, if I am in a path that believes that this is valuable and I'm pursuing that, it may take me away from people who don't believe that is valuable.
And that's okay. I'm
and thus, be okay with that. And that's, I mean, I don't know. I don't think that would cause other people to change inherently, though. It would just end up being, these people care and these people don't, and they don't interact. And then neither of them will change because there's no difference that incentivizes it. Sure. Is this turning this in, or is this... Okay, so I think I'm about to turn this quest in which case we'll wrap that up and then wrap everything up. I still don't know how to get there, though. It's... Unless, is this literally just... So it's a matter of jumping a fence. Because the map makes it look as though there's no connection between these, but it's literally just jumping over a roof. It should probably have made that clear.
You must get that chip back, Mr.
I did. Don't be lecturing me. Leave. I got it, you weirdo.
Talk to me like that again, you're not getting any chip.
All right.
He's got a bit of Batman vibes going on.
Well, he's certainly got the voice in attempt. Is this it? Give and inquire. Well, I mean, I'm curious.
Tell me what's on it first.
Blackmail, Mr. Jensen? Don't waste your time.
It's not blackmail.
I won't tell you anything.
Is that blackmail?
There are stones.
I don't think that qualifies when you have something someone wants and you don't give it to them
Me the chip.
until they tell you information.
All right, take it.
I thought blackmail was explicitly, I have something you don't want shown and I'll show it if you don't.
I thank you on Mr. Darrow's behalf.
I think the latter is probably...
I would have thought it was more of the extortion type.
Right,
where
yeah, that's...
Maybe blackmail is a form of extortion or the other way around.
Credit.
I don't know what the bigger umbrella
I got $1,000 for that.
Expect to hear from him soon.
Okay. Cool. Well, I'll admit that actually turned out to more fruitful conversation than I thought, because I thought I was just going to geek out about Star Wars stuff. So, I'd still recommend them for different reasons. The second one, I think, has a character, a sense of character exploration that you don't get from the rest. And this one, I think, is just... The one thing I'll say about this is it does a pretty good job at not exactly recontextualizing the film, but because of the fact that it gives internal monologues for various characters, it adds a certain depth to the film that isn't in the screen version because they can't show you all that's happening on every character's mind.
Sure.
And because of the fact that those elements, the non-dialogue elements, are very strongly written with very, evocative language, I think that, this feels like something no one would ever actually do, but to people who don't like the prequels and think that they're poorly written, I'd be like, read this first and then watch them, because then you might actually appreciate and like it. But then that sort of feels, some people would say that's like, well, that if I have to read the book in order to like the movie, then that's still an indictment of the movie as not being that great. And maybe, but
that's not an unfair statement, but I certainly think that the book is a good place to start.
I wouldn't start with this. I wouldn't recommend someone read this if they haven't seen the movies.
My point is, changing that on a cultural level as an author, the book is certainly a good place to start.
Well, but the thing is, I don't know that it would convince. The people it could convince wouldn't give it the time, and the people who would seek this out probably already liked the movies well enough.
That's probably true.
It would be a slim Venn diagram of the open-minded prequel hater to convince to read this and then have them change their mind. But I don't know. Anyways, it was more fruitful than I thought, both in progress in the game and that discussion. So, turns out geeking out is fun sometimes.
You ought to apply your brain when you're taking in even
Open
things
your
like
eyes! Stick your head out! Stick your brain in the book!
Open your eye! The one on your forehead! No, I'm just playing.
You gotta wrap up. Got a closer? Flip me your left for a convincer.